The Korean billionaire CEO with his mistress ignored his wife's call, Part 2. 3 years can change everything, or nothing at all. 3 years ago, Jerome Foster was a man who measured his worth in billions and buildings, a man who barely noticed as his wife faded like a ghost in their cold penthouse. 3 years ago, Marissa lay dying in a cliffside cottage on Jeju Island, her cancer a death sentence, her husband finally awakened to his catastrophic failure as a human being. 3 years ago, their story should have ended. But life, unlike business, sometimes offers second chances to those who don't deserve them. The morning sun bathes their Hanok house in golden light, the traditional curved roof catching dawn's first rays as they spill across Siagwapo's volcanic coastline. Inside, Young-hee sits by the window, her hands shaping wet clay on the wheel, her movements deliberate despite the tremor that wasn't there last month. Her braids fall past her shoulders in intricate patterns that remind Jerome painfully of someone else. Her body, which she told him carried leukemia, has found a fragile equilibrium. The doctors call it managed disease, a holding pattern no one expected to last this long. Jerome calls it borrowed time he doesn't deserve. The man who enters the room bearing tea is not the same Jerome Foster who once ruled Seoul's financial district with cold precision. This man's expensive suits gather dust in a closet he never opens. His phone rarely rings with business calls. The empire he built continues without him, managed by executives he barely speaks to. He visits Seoul only when necessary for the foundation bearing his wife's name, a foundation that funds hospice arts programs and palliative care research across Asia. He has rebuilt something here in this house by the sea. Not the life he had with Marissa. That chance died in his penthouse while he ignored her calls. But something perhaps more valuable. Honesty, presence, the quiet recognition of time's precious nature. Jerome has learned to sit with the dying without trying to fix them. Young-hee has learned to trust this gentle stranger who teaches her to center clay with patience rather than force. Each day feels like borrowed time, a gift neither takes for granted. This morning, like many mornings, Jerome sits beside Young-hee as she works, turning pages of technique manuals she no longer truly needs, simply for the pleasure of being useful to her. Later, other students will arrive, terminal patients from the hospice center who come to learn from the quiet man who once commanded boardrooms. Some show real promise. All receive his patient attention, his gentle correction. The pottery that nearly became his only legacy now fills their home with purpose from dawn until dusk. How sweet their redemption seems. How complete their second chance appears. How naive to believe that karma's accounts could be settled so easily with only 3 years of atonement for 2 decades of cruelty. The universe doesn't forget. The universe doesn't forgive. The universe merely waits for the perfect moment to collect what it's owed. That moment arrives with the Morning Post. Plain manila envelope. Seoul postmark. No distinctive markings except the law firm's embossed logo in the corner, a firm Jerome recognizes because he once used them to destroy competitors. Just his name written in precise legal handwriting. Jerome brings it inside without suspicion, his mind already on the day ahead. A meeting with the hospice board. Plans for the new kiln they're installing. Perhaps a walk along the Black Rocks if Young-hee's strength permits. He opens the envelope in his study, away from the students. The letter unfolds with the crisp formality of legal disclosure. Dear Mr. Foster, I am writing on behalf of the estate of Marissa Foster, née Jong. Per Mrs. Foster's final instructions, this disclosure was to be delivered to you 3 years after her passing, contingent upon certain conditions being met. Those conditions have been satisfied. Mrs. Foster had a daughter from a relationship prior to your marriage. The child, named Young-hee Jong, was raised by Mrs. Foster's sister to protect her from exposure to your former lifestyle. Mrs. Foster requested that her daughter's identity remain confidential unless 1. You demonstrated sustained transformation for a minimum of 3 years, and 2. Young-hee came to know you naturally, without coercion. Young-hee has been attending your pottery classes for 3 months. You know her. What you don't know is that she is your stepdaughter, Marissa's only child, the living legacy of the woman whose calls you ignored. Jerome's vision tunnels. The room tilts. Young-hee, the 29-year-old leukemia patient with Marissa's laugh, with Marissa's hands, with Marissa's way of tilting her head when considering a piece of clay. Of course. How had he not seen it? His hands shake as he continues reading. There is additional information you must know. Young-hee was recently re-diagnosed. Her condition is not leukemia. It is stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma, the same cancer that killed her mother. The initial diagnosis was incorrect, and precious time has been lost. According to her current oncology team at Seoul National University Hospital, Young-hee has approximately 3 weeks without intervention. There is one experimental treatment protocol that shows promise, developed by Dr. Vincent Adeyemi at Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute. However, Dr. Adeyemi has refused to accept Young-hee as a patient upon learning of her connection to you. The name strikes Jerome like a physical blow. Adeyemi. Vincent Adeyemi, the brilliant Nigerian oncologist whose medical research foundation Jerome systematically dismantled 12 years ago. The man whose groundbreaking cancer treatment protocols Jerome buried under litigation and regulatory challenges. The competitor whose patents Jerome stole through corporate espionage and strategically placed donations to government officials. The rival he crushed without mercy or second thought. The man whose wife died of pancreatic cancer while Adeyemi fought desperately to save his institute, his research, his life's work from Jerome's relentless attacks. Jerome's hand moves to the next page, a medical report. Then another. Scans showing masses in Young-hee's pancreas, liver, lymph nodes. Detailed progression charts. Grim prognosis. And finally, a yellow sticky note in handwriting he doesn't recognize, but that carries the weight of justified rage. You destroyed my foundation, Foster. You stole my research. You bought the officials who should have protected medical innovation. While I fought your legal teams, my wife died in a charity ward of the same cancer your stepdaughter now has. I rebuilt from nothing over 12 years. I perfected the treatment that could have saved her. And now I hold the only protocol that might save Young-hee. But why would I help the man who killed my wife? Perhaps watching you lose Marissa's daughter is exactly the justice the universe requires. Dr. Vincent Adeyemi. Jerome had forgotten Adeyemi existed, had never connected his wife's cancer to the treatment he'd helped destroy, had never imagined his past sins would circle back with such perfect, poetic vengeance. But Adeyemi hadn't forgotten. Adeyemi had spent 12 years rebuilding in obscurity, working without acclaim, perfecting the treatment protocols Jerome had tried to steal. And now, according to the detailed research papers stapled to the letter, Adeyemi had developed the only experimental treatment that might save Young-hee from the aggressive cancer consuming her body. A treatment he would never share with the man who destroyed his life. A treatment he dangles like bait, just to ensure Jerome understands exactly who controls Young-hee's fate. A treatment that represents Jerome's only hope and his most perfect punishment. The past we try to bury has a way of resurfacing when we least expect it. The price of redemption is about to get much higher. Young-hee's decline happens with brutal swiftness. Within days of Jerome receiving the letter, days he spends in paralyzed shock, unable to tell her what he knows, she can barely rise from her pottery wheel without assistance. The pain medications that once seemed adequate now barely take the edge off. Her hands, so skilled at centering clay, shake too badly to work. The students stop coming to her station. The quiet focus that defined her presence crumbles beneath the weight of advancing illness and secrets Jerome cannot yet bring himself to reveal. Jerome makes the first obvious move. He throws money at the problem. He contacts Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute directly, offers to fund their research for decades, offers millions, offers billions, offers blank checks with his signature already inked. The response comes back with clinical coldness, delivered via Adeyemi's administrative director. Dr. Adeyemi is not accepting new patients at this time, especially not anyone connected to Jerome Foster. The institute has limited resources and must prioritize patients whose families have not actively worked to destroy medical innovation. We wish Young Hee-jong well and recommend she seek treatment elsewhere. Next, Jerome leverages his remaining connections in Seoul's business world. He calls in favors accumulated over 3 years of philanthropic work. He applies pressure through mutual acquaintances in medical research. He attempts to access Adeyemi's protocols through backdoor channels, colleagues who might share data, researchers who might be persuaded. Every approach meets the same wall of rejection. Adeyemi has anticipated each move, closed each potential path. He has spent 12 years preparing for this moment, ensuring Jerome would have no choice but to approach him directly, on his knees, begging for the life of the daughter he never knew existed. As Young Hee weakens, Jerome grows desperate. The gentle, reformed man who spent 3 years atoning for his past begins to fade like morning mist. In his place, the cold, calculating strategist reemerges. The businessman who built an empire by destroying competitors. The predator who never lost a fight because he never recognized any rules of engagement except victory at all costs. He returns to Seoul for the first time in 18 months, reactivates his executive access at Foster Tower. The building management is shocked to see him. His former office has been converted to a conference room, but within hours, Jerome has a temporary suite on the 79th floor. The familiar surroundings feel both foreign and dangerously comfortable, like an addiction he thought he'd conquered now beckoning him back with promises of power. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he once ruled. The sleek furnishings designed to intimidate rather than welcome. The ghost of his former self lurking in every corner, whispering that mercy is weakness, that only strength will save Young Hee, that the man he became on Jeju Island is too soft to save anyone. His old assistant has long since moved to another company, but word spreads quickly that Jerome Foster is back. Within hours, corporate investigators are on his payroll. Legal teams are assembled. Private intelligence firms are contracted. For 3 days, Jerome works phones and connections tirelessly. He deploys investigators to dig into Adeyemi's personal and professional life, seeking any leverage they might use. He has legal teams searching for vulnerabilities in Adeyemi's patents, any technicality that might force him to share his research under humanitarian use clauses. He attempts to hire away 2 lead researchers from Adeyemi's institute with promises of unlimited funding and protected authorship. He becomes, hour by hour, the man he once was. Calculating, relentless, viewing human beings as means to an end. The man Marissa had forgiven in her final days. The man he had promised never to be again. On the 4th day, as reports come in showing Young Hee's condition deteriorating rapidly, she's been admitted to the hospice center now, no longer able to live independently. Jerome receives an unexpected visitor. Arlene Lawson enters his temporary office without knocking, as confident and beautiful as the day he fired her 3 years ago. The woman who had been his mistress, while Marissa called desperately from a hospital corridor. The woman who had enabled his worst instincts, who had made it easy for him to ignore his wife, who had been complicit in his moral collapse. She wears a crimson suit that looks like it costs more than most people's cars. Her hair is styled differently, shorter, sharper. She carries a leather portfolio embossed with the logo of a corporate consulting firm. "You look terrible," she says without preamble, settling into the chair across from his desk as though no time has passed. "Being a devoted teacher has aged you 20 years, Jerome." Jerome should throw her out, should call security, should honor everything Marissa taught him about becoming a different man. Instead, he hears himself say, "Why are you here, Arlene?" She smiles, the smile of someone who knows they're holding the winning hand. "Because I heard you're trying to take down Vincent Adeyemi, and I happen to know exactly how to do it." Jerome dismisses Arlene without listening to her offer. He's not ready for that particular temptation yet, though he suspects he will be soon. Instead, he spends the night in his temporary office doing what he once did better than anyone: research, analysis, the systematic excavation of an adversary's history, searching for vulnerabilities. Dr. Vincent Adeyemi's file unfolds across 3 monitors like an indictment. Born in Lagos, educated at Oxford and Johns Hopkins. Brilliant oncologist specializing in pancreatic cancer treatment protocols. Founded the Adeyemi Medical Research Foundation in Seoul in 2009 after his wife, Dr. Chioma Adeyemi, relocated for her position as a biochemist at Seoul National University. The foundation showed extraordinary promise, developing experimental treatments that demonstrated unprecedented efficacy in early trials. Then, in 2013, everything collapsed. Jerome's hands slow on the keyboard as the timeline crystallizes. 2013, the year Foster Enterprises was aggressively expanding into medical technology and pharmaceutical investments. The year Jerome identified several promising research foundations as acquisition targets, not because he cared about their work, but because their patents and intellectual property could be monetized, their breakthroughs owned rather than discovered. The Adeyemi Foundation had been one of them. Jerome pulls up the archived business records, and the details return with sickening clarity. He hadn't acquired the foundation. Adeyemi had refused to sell. So Jerome had done what he always did with obstacles that wouldn't move. He destroyed them. A systematic campaign of regulatory complaints filed through shell companies. Strategic donations to government officials who then delayed the foundation's research permits indefinitely. Patent challenges that tied up their most promising treatments in litigation. Poaching their key researchers with offers triple their salaries. It took 18 months, but Jerome had effectively bankrupted the Adeyemi Foundation, forcing it to close in late 2014. The business journals from that period praised Jerome's strategic acumen. Forbes had called it a masterclass in competitive neutralization. Jerome remembered feeling nothing beyond satisfaction at removing a potential competitor from the field. What he hadn't known, what he'd never bothered to learn, was the human cost of his victory. Jerome finds the obituary through a medical journal archive. Dr. Chioma Adeyemi, age 37, died February 2015. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma, stage 4. The notice is brief, clinical, but Jerome reads between the lines with the expertise of someone who now understands this disease intimately. She would have been diagnosed sometime in late 2014, right as the foundation collapsed. Right as Vincent Adeyemi was fighting Jerome's legal teams and regulatory challenges. Right as his wife needed experimental treatments that his own foundation had been developing. Jerome pulls up more records, his hands shaking now. Hospital admissions. Insurance claims filed and denied. Chioma had been treated at a public hospital, not the private facilities where someone of her standing should have received care. The experimental protocols her husband had spent years developing sat locked in legal limbo, inaccessible even to their creator. She died in a charity ward while Jerome celebrated acquiring the foundation's patents at a fraction of their value. The timeline spreads before him like an autopsy report. Chioma's diagnosis, November 2014. Foundation bankruptcy. December 2014. Vincent Adeyemi's desperate attempts to access his own research. January 2015. Her death. February 2015. Jerome's announcement that Foster Enterprises had secured valuable oncology patents. March 2015. Patents Jerome never used. Research he buried because it wasn't immediately profitable. Treatment protocols that might have saved Chioma Adeyemi if her husband had been able to access them. Jerome sits in his office as dawn breaks over Seoul, surrounded by the evidence of his calculated cruelty, and understands with perfect, horrible clarity what he's done. He didn't just destroy a competitor's business. He killed that man's wife. Not directly, there's no legal culpability here, but as surely as if he'd withheld medicine from someone dying of thirst. And now that same disease has found young Hee, Marissa's daughter. The stepdaughter he never knew existed, carrying the same cancer in her cells, needing the same treatment Vincent Adeyemi has spent 12 years perfecting in his wife's memory. The universe doesn't forget. The universe doesn't forgive. The universe merely arranges perfect symmetry. Jerome thinks of Marissa in her final days, asking him what kind of man he wanted to be when he died. He thinks of young Hee at the pottery wheel, her hands shaking, her time measured in days now, not weeks. He thinks of Vincent Adeyemi, who has every moral right to watch Jerome suffer as he once suffered. And Jerome realizes that no amount of atonement, no amount of transformed behavior can erase the fact that he is responsible for 2 deaths from the same disease. One already claimed, one still hanging in the balance. The ghost of his industrial past has returned, and it wears the face of a dying woman who calls him teacher, who laughs like Marissa, who has no idea that the man teaching her to center clay is the same man who killed her mother's only chance at survival. Jerome's first instinct, honed by 20 years of corporate dominance, is to make the problem disappear with money. Money has always been his most reliable tool, his universal solvent. Every obstacle he'd ever faced had eventually yielded to the right amount applied at the right pressure point. Surely this would be no different. He instructs his legal team to draft an offer. $10 million to Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute, unrestricted funding for Dr. Adeyemi's research programs. No strings attached. No naming rights required. Just money, pure and simple, in exchange for young Hee's admission to the experimental treatment protocol. The response arrives within 6 hours, which Jerome takes as an encouraging sign until he reads it. Mr. Foster, Dr. Adeyemi has instructed me to inform you that Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute does not require funding from Foster Enterprises or any entity associated with Jerome Foster. Our research programs are adequately funded through legitimate sources who have not built their fortunes on the destruction of medical innovation. Your offer is declined. Attorney Park Min-jun, legal counsel. Jerome increases the offer. 25 million. Then 50. Each rejection comes back faster than the last, the language growing colder, more clinical. By the 3rd attempt, Attorney Park's responses have devolved to single sentences. Previously declined offer remains declined. Jerome tries a different approach. He contacts the hospital board that oversees Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute, offering a $100 million endowment for a new research wing. Surely institutional pressure will force Adeyemi's hand. Surely the board will recognize that one patient's treatment is a small price for transformative funding. The board chair calls him personally, her voice tight, with barely controlled anger. Mr. Foster, Dr. Adeyemi is the cornerstone of our oncology program. His research has saved hundreds of lives. If we were to pressure him to violate his ethical principles for money, we would lose him entirely. Your donation is declined. Please do not contact this institution again. Desperation mounting, Jerome pivots to individual appeals. He has his assistant compile a list of every board member, every major donor, every influential figure connected to Adeyemi's institute. He begins making calls, leveraging old connections, promising favors, applying the kind of systematic pressure that once moved mountains. Each conversation ends the same way. Polite at first, then increasingly uncomfortable, then final. No one wants to be the person who forces Vincent Adeyemi to compromise his principles. No one wants to be complicit in Jerome Foster's latest acquisition, even when the thing being acquired is mercy. On the 5th day of rejections, Jerome receives a registered letter at his hotel. The return address is Attorney Park's law firm. Jerome's hands shake as he opens it, hoping against hope that persistence has finally broken through. Mr. Jerome Foster. This letter serves as formal notice that Dr. Vincent Adeyemi is invoking anti-harassment provisions under Korean law. You are hereby forbidden from 1. Contacting Dr. Adeyemi directly or indirectly through any intermediary. 2. Contacting Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute or its employees regarding patient Young Hee-jong. 3. Offering financial inducements to any person or entity connected to Dr. Adeyemi's research. 4. Attempting to access Dr. Adeyemi's treatment protocols through legal discovery or other means. Violation of these terms will result in immediate legal action, including restraining orders and potential criminal harassment charges. Dr. Adeyemi wishes to make clear that no amount of money will change his position. Some debts cannot be paid with currency you stole from others. Young Hee-jong's case has been closed. Dr. Adeyemi recommends she seek palliative care to manage her remaining time with dignity. Sincerely, Attorney Park Min-jun. Jerome reads the letter 3 times, each reading driving the reality deeper into his consciousness. This is not a negotiation. This is not a business transaction. This is a man who has spent 12 years preparing for this exact moment, who has ensured that every path Jerome might take leads to a wall. Money, Jerome's most powerful weapon, is completely useless here. Worse than useless. Each attempt to use it only reinforces Adeyemi's conviction that Jerome hasn't changed at all, that the gentle pottery teacher on Jeju Island was just another mask worn by the same predator who killed Chioma Adeyemi. Jerome sits in his hotel room, the cease and desist letter in his hands, and feels the billionaire's reflex, the instinct that money solves everything, crack like pottery dropped on stone. For the first time in his adult life, his wealth is not just insufficient. It is actively toxic, a reminder of sins that no amount of zeros can erase. Young Hee has perhaps 2 weeks left, and Jerome has exhausted every approach that doesn't require him to become the monster he swore he'd never be again. Arlene finds him on the 7th day, in a private room at a bar in Gangnam where men like Jerome used to conduct business that couldn't be discussed in boardrooms. She slides into the booth across from him without invitation, her crimson suit immaculate, her smile sharp as a scalpel. You look like hell, she observes, signaling the waiter for 2 glasses. I've been watching you flail. It's painful, honestly. The Jerome Foster I knew would have had Adeyemi on his knees by now. The Jerome Foster you knew is dead, he says, though the words taste like ash. 3 years of transformation crumbling under the weight of desperation. Is he? Arlene leans forward, her perfume expensive and deliberate. Because I hear you've been trying to buy your way into Adeyemi's good graces. That's not transformation, Jerome. That's just using a different tool from the same toolbox. What do you want, Arlene? She opens her leather portfolio, sliding a single document across the table. A consulting proposal from her firm, complete with cost projections and timeline. I want to help you save Young Hee. And I can if you're willing to remember who you actually are. Jerome's eyes scan the document. Corporate intelligence gathering. Data acquisition from Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute. Analysis and synthesis of experimental treatment protocols. Everything wrapped in the sanitized language of legitimate business consulting. Industrial espionage, in other words. The exact tactics he'd used 12 years ago to steal Adeyemi's research and destroy his foundation. We have assets inside the Institute, Arlene continues, her voice low and conspiratorial. People who can access Adeyemi's treatment data, complete protocols, drug compounds, administration schedules. Everything you need to synthesize the treatment independently. 3 weeks, maybe 4, and you could have Young-hee in treatment without Adeyemi ever knowing you bypassed him. That's theft. That's survival. That's what you do when the system fails you. Arlene's eyes glitter with something that might be excitement. You think Adeyemi's refusal is moral? It's revenge, Jerome. Pure and simple. He's letting an innocent woman die to punish you. Are you really going to let that happen because you're afraid of being the bad guy again? Jerome stares at the proposal, his reflection ghosted in the polished table surface. The man staring back looks haunted, desperate, teetering on the edge of a precipice he knows intimately. We can start tonight, Arlene says. One signature. One decision. Young-hee gets the treatment. You get to stay the hero pottery teacher who saves dying patients. And Adeyemi never has to know you became exactly what he accused you of being. Jerome's hand moves toward the document. Stops. Moves again. 3 years of redemption balanced against 2 weeks of Young-hee's remaining life. How much, he hears himself ask. Arlene smiles, and Jerome recognizes the expression. It's the smile of someone watching a man fall from grace in real time, someone who knew it was inevitable all along. For you, consider it a gift from an old friend. Jerome returns to Jeju Island 3 days later to find Young-hee sitting in the hospice center's garden, wrapped in blankets despite the mild afternoon. She's lost more weight, her braids now held back with a simple band, her skin carrying that translucent quality that signals time running out. When she sees him approach, something in her expression makes him stop. You've been in Seoul, she says. Not a question. Yes. Handling some foundation business. Liar. The word is soft but cuts like wire. I called looking for you yesterday. Your assistant said you were in meetings with consultants about data acquisition and synthesis protocols. Jerome's blood turns cold. His assistant, new, inexperienced, didn't understand the need for discretion. Young-hee, I can explain. I know who Dr. Adeyemi is, she interrupts, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I know what you did to his foundation 12 years ago. I know his wife died of the same cancer that's killing me. And I know you're planning to steal his research. Jerome sinks onto the bench beside her, the weight of his choices crushing. How long have you known? About Adeyemi? Since the diagnosis. About you planning industrial espionage. She pulls out her phone, shows him a text from someone at the hospice who overheard his call with Arlene 2 hours ago. In a small community, secrets travel fast. Since this morning, I'm trying to save you. By becoming the man who killed my mother? Young-hee's eyes fill with tears, but her voice remains firm. Yes, Jerome. I know about that too. Marissa's sister told me everything when she explained you were my stepfather. She told me what you did, what you became, what you've been trying not to be. Jerome reaches for her hand, but she pulls away. Marissa left me a letter, Young-hee continues, to be opened if I ever met you. She wrote about her final weeks with you, about teaching you to make that crooked bowl, about forgiving you not because you earned it, but because she wanted you to become someone who could live with himself. Then you understand why I have to do this. No. Young-hee's voice cracks. I understand that you're terrified. I understand that you love me, even though you just found out I exist. But Jerome, I would rather die with dignity than live knowing you became a monster again to save me. I would rather have 2 weeks as your student than 20 years bought with stolen medicine and destroyed principles. The words echo across 12 years and 3 deaths. Marissa's voice in the cottage. I would rather die than see you become that man again. Please, Jerome whispers, and he's not sure what he's begging for anymore. Young-hee takes his hand now, her grip weak but deliberate. Promise me you won't do this. Promise me you'll let me go if that's what it takes to keep your soul. Jerome looks at this young woman, Marissa's daughter, his stepdaughter, the living consequence of every choice he's ever made, and realizes she's asking him to choose between her life and his redemption. Some tests have no right answers, only character-revealing choices. Jerome doesn't promise. Instead, he returns to Seoul and becomes the man he swore he'd buried. The transformation happens with terrifying ease, like muscle memory that never truly fades. Within 48 hours, he's assembled a team of corporate attorneys, financial analysts, and strategic consultants, the kind of people who speak in euphemisms about aggressive restructuring and strategic acquisition opportunities. Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute, for all its moral righteousness, has vulnerabilities. Every organization does. Jerome's team finds them with surgical precision. The institute operates under a complex funding structure involving government grants, private donations, and partnership agreements with Seoul National University Hospital. The hospital, in turn, is partially owned by a conglomerate that's been struggling with debt for 2 years. Jerome begins there, quietly acquiring shares through shell companies, building leverage 1 percentage point at a time. He contacts old allies in the Ministry of Health, people who owe him favors from when Foster Enterprises funded their campaigns. Regulatory audits can be triggered with a single phone call. Research permits can be delayed indefinitely with the right bureaucratic pressure. Jerome knows this machinery intimately because he built much of it. Arlene works beside him, coordinating intelligence gathering and strategic positioning. She's in her element, excited by the chess game, the corporate warfare she's missed. It's like watching you wake up, she says one evening, her hand lingering on his shoulder. The real you. Jerome ignores the comment and focuses on the acquisition structure taking shape across his monitors. Within 3 weeks, he could own the hospital that partners with Adeyemi's institute. Within 4, he could force a merger that puts him on the governing board. Within 5, he could make Adeyemi's continued employment contingent on accepting Young-hee as a patient. Legal. Technically clean. Morally monstrous. His legal team presents the final architecture on day 9. A hostile takeover disguised as a rescue package for the struggling conglomerate. 22 billion won in immediate liquidity in exchange for controlling interest. The board would have no choice but to accept. Their creditors were circling, bankruptcy looming. Once we control the hospital, we control the institute, his lead attorney explains, pointing to the organizational charts. Adeyemi becomes our employee. His research becomes our property. He either treats Young-hee or we terminate his position and access his protocols through institutional authority. Jerome stares at the documents, seeing not just a takeover, but a mirror. This is exactly what he did to Adeyemi 12 years ago. The same tactics, the same ruthlessness, the same willingness to destroy an entire institution to get what he wants. The man who taught pottery to dying patients has vanished completely. In his place sits the predator who measured worth in conquests, who saw people as obstacles or assets, who built an empire on the ruins of those too weak to defend themselves. Do it, Jerome says. File the acquisition papers tomorrow morning. Arlene smiles. His legal team nods with professional satisfaction. And somewhere on Jeju Island, Young-hee lies dying, unaware that the man she called teacher has chosen her life over his soul, becoming the monster she begged him not to be. The acquisition papers are scheduled to file at 9 a.m. Jerome returns to Jeju Island at midnight, telling himself he needs to check on Young-hee before the machinery of corporate warfare makes the decision irreversible. But Young-hee is asleep, sedated against the pain, and Jerome finds himself alone in the pottery studio at 2 a.m., unable to face his hotel room or his thoughts. His hands move on autopilot, preparing clay, centering it on the wheel. Muscle memory from 3 years of teaching, 3 years of learning to create rather than destroy. The wheel begins its rotation, the clay cool and responsive under his palms. He works in silence, the studio lit only by a single lamp, shadows dancing across shelves of student work, crooked bowls and imperfect vases, each one representing someone's final act of creation before death. Young-hee's pieces sit on the corner shelf, her progress visible in the increasingly steady walls, the more confident curves. Jerome's hands press too hard, and the clay collapses. He centers it again, tries to pull up the walls, but his pressure is inconsistent, his focus fractured. The bowl he's attempting looks nothing like the work he's been producing, all his hard-won skill abandoned under the weight of what he's about to do. Clay remembers everything. Marissa's voice says in his memory, so vivid, he looks up expecting to see her standing there. But the studio is empty except for shadows and the ghost of her teaching. Every touch, every pressure. You can't force it. You have to listen to what it wants to become. Jerome's hands still on the clay. He remembers that morning 3 years ago, Marissa guiding his fingers through shaping their final bowl together. Her hands on his. Her voice soft with pain and medication, but clear with purpose. What kind of man do you want to be when you die, Jerome? He'd had no answer then, too broken by the reality of losing her to think beyond the present moment. But she'd continued anyway, her words branded into his memory. Not what kind of man you've been. Not what empire you've built or what victories you've claimed. When your heart stops and everything you've accumulated means nothing, what do you want to have been? What do you want the people who survive you to remember? Jerome looks at his hands, clay-covered, the same hands that will sign acquisition papers in 7 hours. The same hands that have spent 3 years learning gentleness, patience, the careful art of creating beauty from formless matter. The same hands that destroyed Adeyemi's foundation and killed Chioma as surely as if he'd withheld medicine from her dying body. He thinks of the Marissa Foster Hospice Art Center, built with the liquidation of his empire. Every room named for a value Marissa had tried to teach him: compassion, presence, dignity, grace. He thinks of the hundreds of patients who've passed through those doors, learning in their final weeks that they could still create, still matter, still leave something beautiful behind. He's about to destroy it all. Not literally, the center will continue to exist. But its meaning, its purpose, its entire foundation will become a lie. How can he teach the dying about dignity and grace, while simultaneously executing a hostile takeover to force a doctor to violate his principles? How can he preach about creation while reverting to destruction the moment stakes are high enough? The clay on the wheel has dried unevenly, ruined. Jerome stares at it, this failed bowl that mirrors his failed transformation. I wanted to be the man who lifted others up, he whispers to the empty studio, to Marissa's ghost, to himself. I wanted to be the man who understood that time matters more than money, that presence matters more than power, that some things, some people are more important than winning. But Young-hee is dying. Marissa's daughter. His stepdaughter. 2 weeks left, maybe less. And Jerome Foster, who has spent 3 years learning to be a different man, is about to prove that transformation is just another mask worn by the same predator. That when stakes are high enough, the monster always resurfaces. That redemption is a luxury afforded only to those who never face impossible choices. He sits at the wheel until dawn, the failed bowl before him, acquisition papers waiting in Seoul, and no answer to Marissa's question that doesn't require him to become something he swore he'd never be again. Some debts can never be repaid. Some choices reveal who we truly are beneath all the years of trying to be someone better. At 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the acquisition papers are scheduled to file, Jerome calls his legal team and tells them to stand down. He doesn't explain. He simply ends the call, turns off his phone, and drives to the address his investigators found weeks ago, Dr. Vincent Adeyemi's home in Songbukdong, a quiet neighborhood far from the steel towers of Gangnam. Rain begins to fall as Jerome stands at the gate. No lawyers, no leverage, no corporate machinery to hide behind. Just a man in clay-stained clothes who has finally run out of ways to avoid the reckoning. He presses the intercom. Waits. The rain intensifies, soaking through his shirt, and he doesn't move. The intercom crackles. I know who you are. Adeyemi's voice, Nigerian accent thick, with contempt. Go away, Foster. I'm not leaving, Jerome says. I'll stand here until you call the police or until I collapse. But I'm not leaving without talking to you. Silence stretches for 5 minutes. 10. Jerome's clothes are drenched, water running down his face, and he doesn't move from the gate. The rain feels appropriate, like the universe washing away the final pretense that he has any power here. The gate buzzes open. Dr. Vincent Adeyemi stands in the doorway of a modest home filled with afternoon light and the smell of rain on garden soil. He's taller than Jerome expected, late 40s, with gray threading through his hair and eyes that hold 12 years of justified rage. You have 5 minutes, Adeyemi says. Then I'm calling security. Jerome steps inside, dripping on the hardwood floor. I came to beg. Not as a CEO. Not with money or threats or leverage. Just as a man who failed one daughter and is begging for a chance to not fail another. You think humility now erases 12 years ago? Adeyemi's voice is controlled but shaking. You think standing in the rain makes you noble? No. I think I killed your wife. Not directly, but as surely as if I'd denied her medicine. And I think young He is dying of the same cancer because the universe has a sense of justice I never possessed. Something flickers across Adeyemi's face. Come with me. He leads Jerome through the house to a room at the end of the hall. When he opens the door, Jerome's breath catches. It's a laboratory, preserved exactly as someone left it. Equipment covered but not packed away. Whiteboard filled with chemical formulas and treatment protocols. Photographs of a woman with kind eyes and Adeyemi's smile pinned to a corkboard. My wife's studio, Adeyemi says quietly. Dr. Chioma Adeyemi. She was the biochemist. The genius. I was just the oncologist who understood how to apply her brilliance. The treatment protocol that could save young He? Chioma developed it. She was 3 months from human trials when you destroyed our foundation. When she got sick, she kept working, kept refining the formulas even as the cancer ate her alive. Jerome stares at the whiteboard, at handwriting that grows shakier toward the bottom, at notes dated February 2015, the month Chioma died. She made me promise something before she passed, Adeyemi continues. That if her treatment ever worked, I would never withhold it out of revenge. That saving lives mattered more than punishing those who took hers. He turns to face Jerome, tears streaming down his face. I've spent 12 years perfecting her work. And every day I've waited for you to come begging, so I could feel righteous denying you. But Chioma would be ashamed of me. She would want young He saved, even if it means helping the man who killed her. Jerome sinks to his knees on the laboratory floor, surrounded by the ghost of a woman whose brilliance he destroyed, whose life he indirectly ended, and who is now saving his stepdaughter from beyond the grave. Jerome stays on his knees, rainwater pooling around him on the hardwood floor of Chioma Adeyemi's preserved laboratory. Dr. Adeyemi stands above him, arms crossed, face carved from justified anger and reluctant compassion. "Say what you came to say," Adeyemi commands. "Then leave my home." Jerome's voice comes out broken, stripped of every polished corporate phrase he'd ever used to obscure uncomfortable truths. 12 years ago, I destroyed your foundation because I saw an opportunity to acquire valuable patents cheaply. I didn't know your wife was sick. I didn't care to know. I saw a competitor, not a human being trying to save lives. I used every weapon in my arsenal: litigation, regulatory pressure, bribed officials, stolen research. I was systematic, efficient, merciless. He looks up at Adeyemi, forcing himself to witness the pain his confession causes. "When your foundation collapsed in December 2014, I celebrated. I toasted my legal team for their strategic brilliance. I never asked what happened to you or your wife. I buried your research because it wasn't immediately profitable, and I moved on to the next acquisition. Why are you telling me what I already know?" Adeyemi's voice cracks slightly. "Because I need you to understand that I know exactly what I did. Not the sanitized version, where I was just a businessman making difficult decisions. The truth. I killed your wife. I stole the research that could have saved her and locked it away while she died in a charity ward. I am responsible for Chioma's death as surely as if I'd injected poison into her veins." Jerome's hands clench on his thighs, clay still visible under his fingernails. 3 years ago, my own wife died of pancreatic cancer. Marissa. She spent her final weeks teaching me that creation matters more than acquisition. That presence matters more than power. That time is the only currency that actually has value. I thought I learned. I thought 3 years of running a hospice center and teaching pottery to the dying meant I'd transformed into someone worthy of the second chance I didn't earn. And then he got sick, Adeyemi says quietly. And then I found out she's Marissa's daughter, my stepdaughter, hidden from me during our marriage because Marissa knew the toxicity of my world would destroy her. Now she's dying of the same cancer, and I discovered that you, the man I destroyed, hold the only treatment that might save her." Jerome's voice drops to a whisper. "I tried everything, Vincent. I offered you money. I leveraged connections. I assembled a hostile takeover to force your hand by seizing control of the hospital you work for. I became exactly the monster he begged me not to be, exactly the predator Marissa died believing I could transcend." "Why didn't you execute the takeover?" Adeyemi asks. "My sources tell me the papers were ready to file this morning. Because I sat in a pottery studio last night and heard my dead wife's voice asking me what kind of man I want to be when I die. And I realized that if I destroyed your institute to steal Chioma's research a second time, I would prove that 3 years of transformation meant nothing. That redemption is just a mask I wear when the stakes aren't high enough to matter." Jerome meets Adeyemi's eyes, tears mixing with rainwater on his face. "I'm not here to negotiate or threaten or manipulate. I'm here to kneel on the floor of your wife's laboratory and confess that I am a murderer who doesn't deserve mercy. To tell you that he is innocent of my sins and deserves to live even though I don't deserve to ask. To beg you, not as Jerome Foster the billionaire, but as a man who failed one daughter and is praying for a chance to not fail another." Silence fills the laboratory, broken only by rain against windows and the hum of equipment left running in memory of its creator. "I cannot undo what I did to Chioma," Jerome continues. "I cannot restore the years you lost fighting my legal teams while she suffered. I cannot repay the debt I owe. but I can kneel here and acknowledge it without excuse or justification. I can tell you that you would be morally justified in refusing me. And I can beg anyway, knowing I have no right to mercy, but praying you'll give it to Young-hee regardless. Adeyemi is silent for a long moment, staring at the man who destroyed his life, now prostrate in his home. Stand up, he finally says. Stand up, Foster. I won't have you kneeling in Chioma's laboratory. She wouldn't want that. Jerome rises slowly, legs unsteady, facing the man he wronged with nothing left to hide behind. Young-hee can start treatment tomorrow, Adeyemi says, his voice thick with emotion. Not because you earned it. Not because I forgive you, I don't know if I ever will. But because Chioma spent her dying days perfecting a treatment meant to save lives, and I won't dishonor her memory by using it as a weapon of revenge. He turns away, unable to look at Jerome any longer. Now get out of my house. And understand that this mercy costs me everything I've held on to for 12 years. Young-hee begins treatment 3 days later in a private suite at Seoul Advanced Oncology Institute that overlooks the Han River. The experimental protocol Chioma Adeyemi developed requires careful monitoring, targeted immunotherapy combined with novel drug compounds that attack pancreatic cancer cells while preserving surrounding tissue. Dr. Adeyemi administers the first infusion himself, his hands steady despite the emotional weight of using his late wife's final gift to save the stepdaughter of the man who killed her. Jerome watches from the doorway, neither invited into the room nor explicitly barred from it. Young-hee, weak but conscious, reaches for his hand as the four begins its slow drip. You didn't do it, she whispers. You didn't become the monster. I tried to, Jerome admits. I came very close. But you stopped. That's what matters. Jerome isn't sure he agrees, but he holds her hand and says nothing. Dr. Adeyemi works in professional silence, checking monitors, adjusting flow rates, his face carefully neutral. When he finishes, he nods curtly to Jerome and leaves without speaking. The treatment takes 6 weeks. 6 weeks of infusions and monitoring, side effects and small improvements, cautious hope balanced against the reality that stage 4 pancreatic cancer doesn't often offer happy endings. Jerome rents a small apartment near the hospital and lives between two worlds, the hospice center on Jeju Island where he continues teaching pottery 3 days a week, and the hospital suite where Young-hee fights for her life. Dr. Adeyemi maintains professional distance, speaking to Jerome only when necessary, communication filtered through nurses and clinical updates. Jerome doesn't push for more. He understands that mercy doesn't require friendship, that saving Young-hee's life doesn't absolve him of Chioma's death. On the 43rd day of treatment, Young-hee's scans show remarkable improvement. The tumors have shrunk significantly. The metastases in her liver have nearly disappeared. Dr. Adeyemi reviews the results with cautious optimism. Remission is possible, perhaps even likely, though nothing is guaranteed with this disease. Jerome finds Adeyemi in Chioma's old laboratory later that evening. The doctor stands before the whiteboard, one hand pressed against his wife's handwriting, tears streaming silently down his face. Thank you, Jerome says from the doorway. I know those words are inadequate, but I don't have better ones. Adeyemi doesn't turn around. Don't thank me. Thank Chioma. Her brilliance is saving Young-hee, not my mercy. Then thank you for honoring her work even when it meant helping me. Adeyemi finally faces him, exhaustion and grief etched deep in his features. I didn't do it for you, Foster. I did it because Chioma believed science belonged to humanity, not individuals. She believed healing was a moral imperative that transcended personal grievances. Denying Young-hee would have betrayed everything she stood for. Does it help? Jerome asks quietly. Knowing her work saved a life? It helps knowing I didn't become what you made me want to become, someone who uses medicine as a weapon. Adeyemi's voice cracks. But it doesn't bring her back. It doesn't give me 12 years of marriage we should have had. It doesn't erase the fact that she died developing a treatment she never received. Jerome nods, accepting the truth he's known all along. I can't repay what I took from you. No, you can't. Adeyemi turns back to the whiteboard. But you can honor it. You can live in a way that makes Chioma's sacrifice mean something. You can be the man your wife believed you could become. That's not redemption, Foster. That's just basic human decency. But it's more than you've managed before. 3 months later, Young Hee is in remission. The cancer isn't gone, it never truly is with stage 4, but it's controlled, managed, giving her time measured in years rather than weeks. She returns to Jeju Island, to the pottery studio, her hands steadier now, her laughter more frequent. Jerome continues teaching, continues serving tea to dying patients, continues trying to be worthy of the mercy he received. He establishes the Chioma Adeyemi Research Endowment with what remains of his fortune, funding pancreatic cancer research in perpetuity. It's not repayment, nothing could be, but it's acknowledgement. Dr. Adeyemi never forgives him. They speak occasionally, brief exchanges about Young Hee's care, clinical updates delivered with professional courtesy and personal distance. Jerome doesn't expect more. Forgiveness isn't something owed, and mercy doesn't require reconciliation. On the first anniversary of Young Hee's treatment, Jerome sits in the pottery studio with the crooked bowl he made with Marissa 3 years ago. Young Hee works beside him, teaching a new student, a teenager with bone cancer, how to center clay on the wheel. Clay remembers everything, Young Hee says, echoing Marissa's words, creating an unbroken chain of wisdom passed from the dead to the dying to those still learning to live. Every touch, every pressure, you have to listen to what it wants to become. Jerome watches his stepdaughter teach, watches her laugh, watches her live the life Chioma's brilliance made possible. And he understands finally what Marissa tried to teach him in her final weeks. Redemption isn't about balancing scales or earning forgiveness. It's about accepting that some debts can never be repaid, only honored through how you choose to live with them. The universe doesn't forget. The universe doesn't forgive. But sometimes, through the mercy of people better than we deserve, the universe offers us a chance to become worthy of the grace we've been given. Not because we've earned it, but because someone who loved healing more than revenge decided that saving one life matters more than punishing one sinner. Jerome Foster will carry Chioma Adeyemi's gift for the rest of his life. He will teach pottery to the dying. He will fund research in her name. He will be present for Young Hee in ways he never was for Marissa. And he will understand, every single day, that these actions don't erase his sins. They simply prove that even monsters can learn, eventually, to stop destroying and start creating something worth leaving behind.